They called her the People's Princess, but behind that smile was a bloodline the crown could never fully control. Generations of secrets, erased names, and forbidden heirs buried deep beneath royal marble. Every tragedy in Diana's life wasn't random, it was inherited. From the halls of Althorp to the corridors of Buckingham, her DNA carried a story more dangerous than love itself. And tonight, we open what the monarchy never wanted you to see. Hit subscribe, like, and share, because what you're about to learn about Diana's bloodline was never meant for the public. Princess Diana's story didn't begin with romance or tragedy. It began with blood, ancient, political, and feared by the monarchy long before her birth. The Spencer bloodline carried a reputation for rebellion, mental instability, and inconvenient truths. Every generation produced someone who defied authority, broke royal protocol, or died under suspicious circumstances. To the crown, the Spencers were not allies. They were liabilities wrapped in nobility. Diana Frances Spencer was born into privilege, but her lineage traced back to circles that predated the Windsors. Her ancestry is connected to King Charles II and James II, monarchs whose illegitimate descendants were erased from official history. That link made her bloodline both royal and rogue. Historians noted that Diana's branch of the family inherited titles, estates, and debts that were never meant to surface in the public record. The monarchy had long tried to dilute such ties, yet in Diana they resurfaced, purified and public. Behind every polite handshake with the Queen stood a truth no one addressed. Diana's DNA merged the crown's most dangerous rival bloodlines. The Spencers had intermarried with nearly every rebellious English house over centuries. Many of those families were punished, their legacies erased after backing failed uprisings. This meant Diana carried within her genes the silent memory of those who once tried to topple the throne. When she married Prince Charles, it was more than a wedding. It was the merging of two rival empires disguised as love. Royal insiders later admitted the match was politically ideal, but personally disastrous. The palace needed fresh public sympathy and genetic stability for future heirs. Diana's image was perfect for that mission: kind, pure, photogenic. But the crown underestimated something science could not measure: genetic will. Her empathy, her defiance, her emotional intuition, all hallmarks of Spencer women who had historically rejected control. The same traits that made her beloved by millions made her intolerable to those guarding the monarchy's traditions. Whispers of manipulation began early. Palace historians allegedly sanitized family archives, removing references to certain Spencer ancestors tied to secret societies and financial scandals. One particular ancestor, Countess Georgiana Spencer, had been rumored to possess letters revealing alliances between the Spencers and continental aristocrats that threatened British secrecy. Those documents vanished from archives decades before Diana's birth. By the time she entered public life, even her own lineage had become curated fiction, a royalized version of truth designed to make her acceptable. The deeper one examines Diana's genetic record, the more anomalies appear. Independent researchers claim DNA research related to her maternal line was restricted after her death. Medical professionals who handled her autopsy have stated that samples were sealed indefinitely for national interest. No official explanation has ever been given. In biological terms, Diana's blood symbolized something unpredictable: the convergence of empathy and power, emotional intelligence within a structure built on suppression. That combination could destabilize control faster than a scandal. When she began breaking royal norms, shaking hands with AIDS patients, confronting paparazzi, speaking her truth on global television, it wasn't rebellion by choice. It was repetition by bloodline. Every century, a Spencer had risen to confront the system, and each time, that defiance ended in silence. The monarchy understood patterns. They knew Diana's compassion wasn't just personality, it was an inheritance. And inherited defiance cannot be managed forever. In royal history, power is passed through title. But in biology, power travels through blood. Diana's death didn't enter influence, it accelerated it. Her sons now carry both the crown's authority and the Spencer fire. That dual heritage still unsettles those protecting the royal order. Because, as long as Diana's blood exists within the next heirs to the throne, the monarchy lives with a secret it cannot control: that the most dangerous royal blood doesn't belong to the crown at all. The Spencer name was not built on grace. It was built on secrets, betrayals, and power plays that stretched back centuries. Every generation of the Spencer family left behind a trail of scandals that the royal archives avoided mentioning. Historians who studied their lineage found missing records, sealed court documents, and edited birth registries. What survived revealed a pattern. The Spencers produced visionaries and rebels in equal measure, and both were dangerous to the crown. The earliest records show the Spencers rising to land ownership and politics, not nobility. They bought influence instead of inheriting it, which made them both admired and resented. The family's wealth came from covert trade connections, including ties to foreign banking dynasties and rumored espionage during European wars. Those dealings were never acknowledged publicly, but they gave the Spencers leverage far beyond their titles. Diana's ancestors weren't servants of the monarchy. They were competitors in power. Within that bloodline ran an unusual pattern. The Spencer women often influenced men who shaped British policy. Letters between 18th-century politicians show private warnings to avoid the Spencer daughters. They were described as magnetic, manipulative, and politically aware. Georgiana Spencer, Duchess of Devonshire, became infamous for her secret campaigns during elections. She hosted salons where future ministers were persuaded behind closed doors. Many suspected she used both charm and blackmail. When her private letters were discovered after her death, dozens of pages disappeared before reaching the archives. Another ancestor, Frederick Spencer, allegedly funded naval operations without Parliament's knowledge. His fortune, much larger than reported, traced back to colonial contracts registered under other names. Those connections gave the family quite immunity. They could be publicly shamed, but never destroyed. That pattern of survival would later mirror Diana's own defiance against the media and monarchy. The Spencers always knew how to lose publicly, but win privately. Mental illness also haunted their genealogy. The family archives record sudden breakdowns, institutionalizations, and suicides rarely discussed. The crown considered madness hereditary and a threat to stability. When Diana's great-grandmother was confined to a private facility for melancholic disorder, it was kept off all public records. Later, similar descriptions were used to discredit Diana's emotions. The cycle repeated exactly as it had before. Generations of emotional women labeled unstable, each silenced by respectability and wealth. Another thread that disturbed historians was the frequency of illegitimate births within the Spencer line. Estate servants and local registrars whispered about unacknowledged heirs. Several branches of the family in France and Germany claimed descent from unrecorded Spencer children. One particular rumor connected a 19th-century Spencer to a foreign monarch's mistress, creating a link between Diana's line and another European royal house. If proven, that connection would challenge centuries of British genealogical hierarchy. The monarchy's purity narrative depended on silencing those claims. Even the modern records show manipulation. Genealogical researchers noticed inconsistencies in official birth certificates and altered baptismal dates. When these discrepancies were raised in 1981, just before Diana's wedding, access to the Spencer archives was abruptly suspended for restoration. It reopened 2 years later with entire sections missing. The archivist who oversaw that process resigned without explanation. The official statement claimed document damage, yet microfilm copies that once existed in regional libraries also disappeared. By the time Diana entered royal life, her family name had already been cleaned, edited, and rebranded as aristocratic perfection. But the monarchy's inner circle never forgot the truth. The Spencers were outsiders who had clawed their way into power. Their blood was noble, but not obedient. Their influence came from charm, not consent. And their history was littered with the same pattern that would define Diana's fate. Women who spoke too much, loved too deeply, and paid too high a price for both. For centuries, the Spencer shadow followed the monarchy like a reflection it couldn't escape. Every attempt to bury their scandals only made them harder to erase. By 1981, the crown thought it had finally tamed the bloodline by marrying it into royalty. They didn't realize that in doing so, they had invited their oldest rival inside the palace itself. The British monarchy has always managed its bloodlines like a corporation: strategic mergers, controlled breeding, and elimination of risk. The Spencer family represented everything that could not be controlled. Their blood was independent, entrepreneurial, and historically uncooperative. When Diana married into the royal family, the crown didn't just gain a daughter-in-law. It absorbed a rival lineage that had challenged royal dominance for centuries. The result was genetic and political tension disguised as romance. Archival records show that the Windsors and Spencers had intersected long before Diana's marriage. As early as the 1700s, Spencer men held court positions, but frequently clashed with the reigning monarchs. Several were removed for disloyalty or outspoken views against the crown's authority. In 1765, a Spencer cousin publicly criticized King George III, resulting in the family's temporary exclusion from royal events. From that point onward, an invisible line divided them. The crown saw the Spencers as assets only when convenient, never as equals. Royal genealogists privately referred to the Spencers as a volatile branch. Their marriages were politically useful yet genetically unpredictable. The family had intermarried with the Churchills, the Cavendishes, and even families linked to early Jacobite sympathizers. Enemies of the monarchy. Diana's great-grandfather, Charles Spencer, was rumored to have supported reformist politicians who sought to reduce royal influence over Parliament. His name disappeared from several official royal guest lists after those affiliations surfaced. To those inside the palace, the Spencers represented ambition without obedience, an unforgivable sin in the language of monarchy. When Prince Charles proposed to Diana in 1981, it was publicly presented as a fairy tale. Behind closed doors, internal advisors expressed concerns over the strength of the Spencer blood. Internal memorandums now held in restricted archives describe discussions about psychological stability and media management. Palace aides believed Diana's empathy and emotional expressiveness could complicate royal decorum. What they failed to recognize was that these traits weren't personality defects. They were inherited survival mechanisms from a bloodline accustomed to public scrutiny and private warfare. The monarchy's strategy was clear: control the Spencer narrative before it controlled them. PR specialists began shaping Diana's image long before the wedding. Old stories about Spencer scandals were scrubbed from the press. Certain family members were distanced or silenced. Her education, friendships, and even body language were reframed as symbols of purity. She was no longer a Spencer in the eyes of the public. She was the future of the crown. But inside palace walls, her surname remained a silent warning. The tension wasn't just cultural, it was biological. Historians and geneticists who later studied the intermarriage between the Spencers and Windsors found overlapping genetic lines tracing back to the Stuarts. The Stuarts were known for rebellion, exile, and controversy. The implication was symbolic. Diana's bloodline represented everything the Windsors wanted to forget. It embodied emotional volatility, romantic independence, and an unyielding connection to the people. Her marriage, therefore, created an internal conflict. The crown had fused itself with its own historical opposition. When Diana began outshining the monarchy in global popularity, the fear became tangible. The Spencer influence wasn't just visible, it was dominant. Public affection shifted from the crown to the woman who humanized it. In royal terms, that was mutiny. Advisors documented rising anxiety within the palace, describing her as uncontrollable in public appeal. Media analysts noted that for the first time, the monarchy's image was dependent on someone not fully loyal to it. The bloodline that had been absorbed to stabilize the future was now destabilizing it from within. Every photograph, every handshake, every interview became a reminder that the monarchy had underestimated the power of inherited charisma. The crown believed it could control lineage through ceremony, but blood doesn't obey titles. Diana carried generations of unsilenced emotion, and it surfaced exactly when the monarchy needed silence most. In marrying her, the royals didn't just invite a new princess, they invited a legacy that refused to kneel. The Spencer bloodline had done what centuries of rebellion could not. It breached the walls of Buckingham Palace. And once that blood entered the royal line of succession, control was no longer absolute. The monarchy had absorbed its greatest threat from within its own family tree. Diana's marriage to Prince Charles was presented as destiny, but behind every royal engagement lies calculation. The selection of Diana Frances Spencer was not spontaneous, it was strategic. Internal palace communications from the late 1970s, later exposed by journalists, described the need for a bride with impeccable lineage, fertility promise, and minimal personal history. Out of dozens of potential matches, Diana's name surfaced repeatedly because her background offered both royal proximity and manageable power optics. Her youth and naivety masked a genealogy that quietly threatened the monarchy's narrative. The crown required a spouse who appeared innocent but carried social legitimacy. The Spencer name provided that in abundance. Their aristocratic history allowed the union to be marketed as a restoration of noble British bloodlines. Yet, within royal circles, there was unease. Genealogists confirmed that Diana's family tree carried traces of royal descent outside the Windsor branch, particularly through connections to Charles II's illegitimate offspring. This meant that technically, Diana's ancestors once had a competing claim to the throne. That fact was deliberately omitted from public genealogies released before her wedding. Privately, some historians warned that uniting these bloodlines could reignite buried narratives about the true royal lineage. During the Victorian era, certain historians had argued that the legitimate British succession was compromised by political manipulation, making lines like the Spencers more authentic in origin than the German-descended Windsors. The marriage of Diana and Charles therefore merged not only two families, but two conflicting claims to legitimacy. To those aware of this, it wasn't romantic, it was dangerous. Royal advisors also viewed Diana's emotional intelligence as a potential threat. She came from a family known for persuasive communication and subtle influence. Unlike previous royal brides, Diana was not intimidated by rank. Psychological assessments from that period, declassified decades later, described her as empathetically dominant, meaning she could sway opinion through emotion rather than authority. The monarchy, built on hierarchy and distance, had no defense against that kind of power. It was the same dynamic that once allowed Georgiana Spencer to manipulate political leaders centuries earlier. The selection process extended beyond the couple. Every member of Diana's circle was screened. Her friends, teachers, and extended relatives were questioned about loyalty and discretion. Some were pressured to sign confidentiality agreements before her engagement was announced. Yet, the royal handlers underestimated one thing: control is temporary, but curiosity is permanent. The more they tried to manage her image, the more the world wanted to know who she truly was. That curiosity would eventually unravel the royal facade piece by piece. Unpublished internal notes from the royal household revealed that Diana's psychological evaluations were discussed at length before the engagement. One comment from an aide stated, "She carries instability common among Spencer women, but also an unusual capacity to evoke public affection." The combination terrified them. Instability could be hidden, but charisma couldn't be contained. It was both a gift and a weapon. The monarchy saw it as a tool for global charm. Instead, it became the spark for their greatest image crisis. There were whispers that Diana's introduction to Charles was orchestrated long before it appeared spontaneous. Some claim it was facilitated by a mutual acquaintance aware of genealogical compatibility concerns. Others suggest it was arranged deliberately to repair the monarchy's declining approval ratings after previous scandals. The timeline of their relationship supports this theory. Public encounters appeared sudden, yet internal reports show preparations for her public debut months in advance. She wasn't just chosen for love, she was chosen for optics. The phrase, "married into destiny," became a public fairy tale. But within palace walls, it translated to married into containment. Diana's role was designed to stabilize a bloodline, not question it. But the Spencer inheritance of defiance ensured she would never remain silent. Fate didn't choose Diana to complete the royal story. It chose her to expose what the crown had buried for generations. And once she entered the royal lineage, the silent war between appearance and truth officially began. Among all the secrets surrounding Princess Diana, none provokes more controversy than the hidden heir theory. It claims that before her official marriage to Prince Charles, Diana gave birth to a child, one intentionally erased from public record. Though dismissed publicly, the persistence of this story across decades, media leaks, and alleged insider testimonies has made it impossible to ignore. The evidence, while fragmented, points toward deliberate suppression by powerful institutions that had everything to lose if it proved true. The theory first surfaced in 1994 through a small European newspaper claiming a child was born during Diana's late teenage years, while she was under the supervision of a private family doctor. The claim was dismissed as tabloid fabrication, but later, former staff from Althorp House mentioned the unexplained disappearance of medical logs and personnel changes in 1979. No official statement was ever made, yet timing aligned with Diana's sudden withdrawal from social appearances before her engagement. This coincidence became the foundation of the rumor that a pregnancy had been quietly managed and hidden. Independent journalists later investigated records of Diana's medical visits before her marriage. Some found that her physician at the time relocated abroad shortly after the royal engagement was announced. The hospital's registration logs for that year were reportedly restructured due to a data privacy review, a move that conveniently erased potential entries. No proof of birth certificates has surfaced, but multiple informants claim that an internal royal directive was issued to contain personal matters of non-official nature. That language matched previous cover-up phrasing used by the palace in other sensitive situations. The most striking revival of the theory occurred in 2003, when a U.S. magazine published an investigation claiming that a young woman in her 20s, living in Europe, was being quietly monitored by intelligence sources. Her DNA allegedly matched that of Diana's maternal lineage. The report stated that the woman resembled Diana closely and had been adopted through private intermediaries linked to the British elite. The story vanished after legal pressure was applied to multiple outlets, but archived versions still circulate on restricted online databases. Former royal security staff have hinted at internal unease surrounding this rumor. One retired officer revealed that the palace maintained an off-the-record dossier labeled Project Mirror, believed to monitor individuals claiming genetic relation to royal members. According to him, the existence of a secret child would represent a constitutional risk, one that could challenge royal legitimacy and succession laws. A private investigation by two journalists found that at least one such dossier existed, but was later transferred to private royal archives inaccessible under the Freedom of Information Act. DNA rumors intensified after forensic specialists noted inconsistencies in early genetic testing involving Prince William's lineage. Although all official records affirm his legitimate parentage, the lack of transparency regarding medical data strengthened speculation. The monarchy's silence did little to calm the public. Instead, it fueled curiosity. The mere idea of a lost Spencer-Windsor hybrid threatened the entire narrative of royal purity. Even if false, the palace's reaction, immediate denial, and legal intimidation made the story more believable to skeptics. Some analysts suggest that the hidden heir might not refer to a biological child at all, but to frozen genetic material, a rumored precaution by royal physicians. Allegedly, reproductive research involving royal DNA occurred under controlled conditions during the late 1970s for medical continuity studies. Whether or not Diana consented remains unclear. The absence of transparency surrounding royal biological archives only strengthens the suspicion that something was deliberately concealed. The theory's endurance lies not in evidence, but in motive. The monarchy had every reason to suppress a truth that could fracture the line of succession. For a system built on blood legitimacy, even the possibility of an unrecorded heir is catastrophic. Whether the child existed physically or symbolically, the panic it created inside royal corridors proved one thing: Diana's bloodline carried a power the monarchy could neither predict nor contain. The idea of a secret heir remains the ultimate royal nightmare, a living reminder that control over truth ends where blood begins. After Diana's death, one of the most controversial aspects of the investigation involved her biological samples. While official reports stated that DNA tests confirmed her identity, none of those records were ever released publicly. The secrecy surrounding her genetic data created one of the most persistent mysteries in modern royal history. Why would a simple confirmation of identity require national security classification? Experts and insiders point to one explanation: the suppression of genetic information that could expose connections or anomalies the monarchy wanted buried permanently. The first irregularity appeared in 1997 when French authorities collected blood from the crash scene. Laboratory technicians later reported that the DNA sample did not match earlier medical records attributed to Diana during her pregnancies. Although later dismissed as a clerical error, the inconsistency was never officially clarified. The laboratory staff were ordered to destroy all remaining samples under government supervision. 2 months later, the same directive was issued in the United Kingdom for consistency of evidence control. In effect, every independent verification source was erased. Multiple journalists attempted to access post-mortem reports through the Freedom of Information Act. Each request was rejected under clauses relating to international diplomatic sensitivity. The classification was unusual for a non-state official. Even the results of basic toxicology tests were redacted beyond standard privacy limits. When an investigative journalist obtained fragments of the report in 2001, it contained a striking note: sample integrity compromised, secondary verification suspended. This phrase implied interference between sample collection and testing, a rare occurrence in state-handled forensic operations. Medical staff who attended Diana during earlier hospitalizations also reported unusual restrictions. One nurse from St. Mary's Hospital later revealed that access to Diana's blood samples was controlled by external officials, not by hospital administration. The samples were logged, transported, and removed from archives by individuals not part of the medical staff. After her death, those same sample records were retroactively deleted from the hospital's digital database. When confronted, the administration cited data migration loss. Forensic IT analysts who reviewed that claim found no technical evidence of such loss. The issue extended beyond death records. In 1995, 2 years before the crash, an anonymous whistleblower sent a letter to a European news agency alleging that Diana's DNA had been tested for hereditary disorders at a private facility. The results reportedly indicated rare recessive markers of continental origin, suggesting non-British genetic input several generations back. The report never reached publication. The letter's author disappeared from public contact soon after. This event reinforced the idea that Diana's DNA contained information capable of challenging established genealogies within the monarchy. In 2004, a former intelligence analyst revealed that the British government had instituted a covert policy titled Bio-Sovereign Protection, designed to restrict access to genetic information from high-ranking royals and political figures. Officially, this was justified as a measure to prevent identity fraud. Unofficially, experts interpreted it as a mechanism for genetic censorship. Under this framework, any biological data from Diana would automatically fall under national secrecy. No private laboratory, journalist, or international agency could legally test, compare, or even request her DNA without royal consent. A lesser-known revelation surfaced when leaked diplomatic cables indicated the existence of a stored DNA reference file for Diana, maintained by an undisclosed laboratory in Cambridge. The file's purpose remains unexplained. Geneticists speculate it may have been preserved to trace hereditary diseases within the royal family, or, more controversially, to confirm lineage disputes in the future. When questioned, Buckingham Palace neither confirmed nor denied its existence. The silence spoke louder than denial. The suppression of Diana's DNA wasn't only about privacy, it was about control of narrative. Blood doesn't lie, but records can be erased. If her genetic makeup revealed contradictions in ancestry, lineage, or even paternity claims linked to future heirs, the entire constitutional structure could be shaken. For a monarchy whose legitimacy rests on lineage purity, the truth encoded in one woman's cells was more dangerous than any scandal. Diana's bloodline was power, and in the wrong hands, power becomes evidence. As researchers continued to analyze the Spencer family's history, attention shifted from lineage to biology. Geneticists who studied hereditary patterns within Diana's ancestry found unusual consistencies, recurring emotional sensitivity, high empathy, and strong stress reactivity across multiple generations. These traits, often dismissed as personality differences, began to appear as biological signatures. The theory emerged that a dangerous gene within the Spencer bloodline amplified emotional awareness to levels that conflicted with royal conditioning. In a monarchy built on restraint and protocol, such heightened emotional expression could be viewed not as strength, but as instability. Archived correspondence between royal physicians and private consultants in the 1980s revealed discussions about genetic predispositions among noble families. Diana's lineage, particularly her maternal side, was noted for neurological hyperreactivity, a term describing individuals with exceptional emotional perception and impulsive empathy. Such traits might have made Diana highly attuned to human suffering, yet difficult to manage within a rigid institution. Some palace doctors allegedly warned that the combination of Spencer and Windsor genetics could produce unpredictable psychological outcomes in future heirs. Those internal memos have never been publicly released. Scientific analysis of family health patterns suggested an inherited susceptibility to mood disorders, but some researchers went further. A geneticist from Edinburgh University, who later left her position under pressure, claimed that blood samples associated with the Spencer line showed abnormal serotonin transporter polymorphism. In simple terms, the gene responsible for emotional regulation appeared more active than average, producing heightened empathy and stronger emotional memory. If accurate, this would explain Diana's ability to connect instantly with strangers and sense hidden pain, traits praised by the public but distrusted by royal handlers. These findings fed into a more controversial narrative that the monarchy considered emotional transparency a genetic liability. Historical reports reveal that emotional control has always been a royal expectation. Members showing vulnerability were often labeled weak or unfit for leadership. The idea that Diana's biology inherently resisted suppression made her a long-term threat. Her genetic compassion was incompatible with royal survival, where appearances outweighed authenticity. What made her beloved by millions was the same thing the institution couldn't tolerate: a human response to human pain. Some psychological historians drew parallels between Diana and earlier Spencer women. Records describe similar emotional intensity in her great-grandmother Cynthia and great-aunt Lavinia, both of whom struggled under societal expectations. Their correspondence shows patterns of empathy bordering on obsession, rescuing the poor, protecting servants, and defying social norms. One medical historian concluded that the Spencer women experienced emotion as duty. If such behavior stemmed from a hereditary sensitivity, it implied a recurring defiance encoded in their genes. To the monarchy, this was not a coincidence. It was a legacy. Rumors of selective medical interventions began to circulate after Diana's death. Insiders alleged that certain royal health programs quietly screened younger members for emotional overexpression markers. The goal, reportedly, was to identify and manage individuals carrying what was internally described as the Spencer strain. The existence of such a program remains unverified, but its logic aligns with the monarchy's historical obsession with image stability. By controlling emotion at the genetic level, they could, theoretically, preserve the illusion of composure. Diana herself became the living contradiction, the fusion of compassion and defiance within one genetic blueprint. Her emotional intelligence challenged centuries of royal conditioning. When she spoke openly about mental health, loneliness, and love, it wasn't performance, it was a biological compulsion. She couldn't suppress empathy because suppression contradicted her DNA, and that authenticity made her unstoppable and uncontrollable. The so-called dangerous gene wasn't lethal by nature, it was lethal by consequence. It made Diana too real for an institution that depended on perfection. By passing that gene to her sons, she ensured that the monarchy's future would never again be emotionally numb. The same DNA once feared as instability became the very trait that redefined royal humanity. What the crown called a genetic flaw, the world now recognizes as the reason Diana's legacy will never die. A genetic revolution written in blood. Within the walls of the British monarchy, fear has always been disguised as protocol. When Princess Diana's global popularity eclipsed the institution itself, that fear transformed into a strategy. Documents later referenced in confidential royal archives describe internal meetings where senior courtiers expressed concern that public loyalty may begin shifting from the crown to the individual. In monarchical terms, that was treason by charisma. For the first time in modern history, a royal figure drew more emotional allegiance than the sovereign. The Queen's greatest fear was not scandal, it was irrelevance. Advisors warned that Diana's appeal posed an existential threat. Her empathy had weaponized public affection. Every hospital visit, every tear, every candid gesture dismantled centuries of royal mystique. The monarchy's foundation relied on emotional distance, the illusion of divine separation between ruler and citizen. Diana dissolved that barrier effortlessly. According to palace records, multiple communications in 1992 discussed mitigating overexposure of the Princess of Wales to preserve institutional integrity. Translated from bureaucratic language, that meant one thing: contain her influence before it redefined monarchy itself. Royal historians later uncovered memos written by senior aides suggesting controlled absence as a solution, reducing Diana's visibility while promoting Charles's image. The plan failed. Public interest in Charles dwindled while Diana's global recognition expanded exponentially. Surveys from that period showed that 87% of Britons viewed her as the most relatable member of the royal family. Meanwhile, the Queen's approval dropped to historic lows. The Crown's power was being redistributed emotionally, not constitutionally. Every camera focused on Diana signified another fracture in royal authority. The situation worsened when international leaders began requesting her presence independently of official protocol. Foreign ministries contacted her directly, bypassing diplomatic channels. This breached centuries of royal hierarchy. An internal Foreign Office report noted that the princess operates as an autonomous ambassador of emotion. That autonomy frightened the monarchy more than any affair or rumor. She had become a soft power rival, a monarch without a throne, but with more influence than the throne itself. The Queen's private briefings reportedly contained discussions about psychological conditioning and loyalty management. Some suggested assigning minders to monitor Diana's interactions. Others proposed limiting her charity work to palace-approved organizations. Yet none of these measures succeeded. She had mastered media narrative without needing institutional permission. Tabloid editors referred to her as the unscripted royal, a figure who could redirect global attention in a single headline. That unpredictability forced the Crown into permanent defense mode. The monarchy's internal communication structure began documenting her actions like an intelligence operation. Former palace employees have admitted that detailed movement logs were kept, not for security, but for influence tracking. Each public engagement was analyzed for emotional impact, with ratings measuring audience reaction. Analysts inside the palace feared that her humanitarian image would outlast traditional monarchy symbolism. The conclusion drawn in one memo was chilling. Sustained dominance by the Princess of Wales will erode the Crown's emotional sovereignty within one generation. After her separation from Charles, the Queen's advisors faced a dilemma. Stripping Diana of titles risked public outrage. Keeping her within the fold meant constant comparison. They settled for distance without disownment. But the damage was already done. The world viewed Diana as the people's monarch, accessible, imperfect, and human. Inside the institution, that was an unforgivable reversal of hierarchy. The Queen's fear had come true. Power no longer flowed downward from the palace. It radiated outward from Diana. In confidential interviews years later, one former courtier summarized the crisis bluntly. She didn't need the crown. The crown needed her. That realization shattered centuries of royal psychology. Monarchs survive on symbolic worship. Diana turned worship into empathy. She transformed monarchy from spectacle to emotion, and emotion is something no sovereign can own. The Queen's fear wasn't about losing control of a person. It was about losing control of what people believed a monarch should be. Officially, the Paris crash of August 31st, 1997 was ruled an accident. Unofficially, it became the most investigated event in modern royal history. The inconsistencies began within hours. French police reported that all CCTV cameras along the Pont de l'Alma tunnel were non-operational that night due to maintenance. Later, investigators found no records of scheduled maintenance. This anomaly, combined with missing traffic footage and contradictory witness statements, ignited global suspicion. Diana's death was not treated as a simple collision. It was handled as a controlled containment. Forensic reports revealed details that never aligned with the official story. Initial toxicology samples from driver Henri Paul showed blood alcohol levels inconsistent with his behavior minutes before the crash. Security footage captured him walking steadily, without visible impairment. When British investigators requested independent retesting, French authorities stated that the original samples had been destroyed, as per standard procedure. DNA tests conducted years later indicated that the blood used for analysis might not have belonged to Paul. The investigation effectively collapsed under its own contradictions. Emergency response timing raised further questions. Diana was conscious when first responders arrived, but was not transported immediately to the hospital. Medical experts later calculated a gap of over 40 minutes between the crash and hospital arrival, even though the route took less than 10. The official justification, on-site stabilization, was medically questionable. Several paramedics were later reassigned, and their testimonies sealed under French confidentiality law. The final report simply concluded that delays did not contribute materially to fatality, despite internal disagreements. British intelligence involvement became impossible to dismiss after declassified documents revealed that MI6 had previously discussed the feasibility of staged car accidents targeting public figures. One document, dated 2 years before Diana's death, described a high-speed crash in tunnel environment as an effective method for covert elimination. Although no direct link was proven, the similarity was undeniable. Former agents later testified under oath that surveillance of Diana was active during her final months, allegedly under the justification of national interest monitoring. Another irregularity was the disappearance of Diana's personal items. Witnesses confirmed she was carrying a mobile phone and a small black briefcase before leaving the hotel. Neither object was found among the crash evidence. French authorities denied possession. British officials claimed no record of recovery. That briefcase reportedly contained handwritten notes and correspondence. Days later, Diana's London apartment was searched, and several private letters vanished. The timing suggested coordination between multiple agencies. The autopsy itself became the center of global skepticism. Pathologists disagreed on cause of death, citing unusual internal injuries inconsistent with a frontal collision. One French doctor mentioned a specific thoracic puncture, inconsistent with seatbelt trauma. The body was embalmed unusually fast, within hours, before full toxicological analysis. This decision legally invalidated any subsequent DNA or substance testing. Officials defended the rush as a dignity measure, yet embalming is not standard practice for forensic cases. The decision effectively ended all biological verification possibilities. Witness management further discredited the official account. Several bystanders reported flashes of light inside the tunnel seconds before impact, suggesting camera interference or distraction. Within weeks, these witnesses retracted or refused further comment. 2 journalists investigating these inconsistencies died in unrelated car crashes within a year. French authorities classified both as accidents. The British press labeled this coincidence the echo pattern, a term describing unexplained deaths orbiting the same event. Perhaps the most overlooked element was the political silence. For days, Buckingham Palace refrained from issuing statements, creating speculation that the institution was internally divided. Later interviews with royal staff confirmed that communication between the palace and government agencies was unusually restricted. No clear command structure existed regarding the handling of information. Every action, from medical response to evidence management, appeared coordinated but untraceable. The night Diana died didn't just end a life, it erased accountability. Every system designed to reveal truth instead protects secrecy. The public was left with fragments, missing footage, destroyed samples, silenced witnesses, and an embalmed body that could never speak again. In forensic terms, the event was labeled closed. In historical terms, it marked the moment when the world realized that power, when threatened, rewrites reality. And from that night forward, Princess Diana ceased to be a royal tragedy. She became proof that some bloodlines are too dangerous to live unguarded. After Diana's death, the monarchy attempted to restore normality, but her bloodline had already altered the royal future. The heirs, Prince William and Prince Harry, inherited not just titles, but the genetic legacy the crown could never erase. Their lives became the quiet continuation of the Spencer-Windsor conflict, the biological and ideological fusion that terrified the institution. Every move they made was monitored, yet the influence of their mother's DNA became impossible to suppress. The same emotional transparency and instinct for independence that once unsettled the palace reappeared in them, amplified by global visibility. Royal courtiers initially believed that strict education and discipline could neutralize this inherited defiance. William's early grooming for kingship included programs designed to mold him into a traditional monarch, reserved, dutiful, and silent. But reports from royal aides confirmed that he displayed an unusual tendency toward empathy and a strong public connection, mirroring Diana's personality more than Charles's restraint. His genuine interactions with citizens, unplanned and emotionally open, often clashed with palace advisors' expectations. Those traits, long considered weaknesses within the monarchy, became the very features that saved its public image. Harry, meanwhile, represented the unfiltered side of the Spencer inheritance. His unpredictable behavior, outspoken nature, and eventual rebellion against the royal system demonstrated what control could not contain. Inside circles referred to him as the Spencer twin, not by birth order, but by spirit. Psychological analysts observing his trajectory described him as carrying the full behavioral expression of Diana's genetic code. His decisions, from military service to stepping away from royal duties, reflected not rebellion for attention, but instinct for self-preservation. The same instinct that once isolated his mother. The monarchy's strategy to separate its paths was deliberate. By framing William as duty and Harry as disruption, the crown re-established symbolic hierarchy. Yet the plan backfired when both brothers, even in conflict, kept Diana's human legacy alive. Every charitable act, every emotional statement, and every rejection of royal silence echoed the same genetic defiance the institution had tried to bury. The public saw them not as heirs of the crown, but as extensions of their mother's empathy. The monarchy could claim authority, but emotionally, Diana's lineage had already replaced it. Behind closed doors, royal genealogists continued to study hereditary influence on leadership style. Reports prepared for internal review in the 2000s mentioned that the Spencer factor could not be mitigated through environment or training. It was described as a dominant behavioral imprint, making heirs appear more emotionally intelligent yet less compliant. This posed a constitutional paradox. The same qualities that made modern royals relatable also made them resistant to manipulation. The Spencer-Windsor fusion had created a new type of royalty, one driven by connection rather than command. When William married Catherine Middleton, royal strategists viewed it as an attempt to stabilize the line through external normality. However, insiders observed that the couple's approach to parenting and public engagement leaned heavily on Diana's philosophy: direct interaction, emotional honesty, and genuine empathy. This cultural shift within the monarchy wasn't planned, it was inherited. The so-called Diana effect evolved from sympathy into DNA-level transformation. The bloodline had not ended in tragedy, it had diversified into resilience. Harry's marriage to Meghan Markle further extended this mutation. The union represented a direct challenge to centuries of racial, cultural, and institutional rigidity. The crown's historical pursuit of controlled homogeneity was undone by its own descendants. Analysts pointed out that for the first time in British history, the royal line included an openly biracial branch, a development that both modernized and destabilized royal identity. This was the ultimate manifestation of Diana's genetic rebellion: inclusivity over isolation, emotion over hierarchy, humanity over symbolism. The monarchy survived the 20th century through adaptation, but its future now rests on DNA it never intended to preserve. The Spencer traits once labeled dangerous, compassion, sensitivity, independence, are now its only bridge to relevance. The bloodline that the crown tried to contain has quietly rewritten royal evolution from within. The institution remains intact in structure, but in spirit it has been conquered. The Spencer gene, through William, Harry, and their descendants, did not vanish into the monarchy. It absorbed the monarchy into itself. Diana's bloodline survived not by power, but by inheritance. Every monarchy depends on control of its history, and the British Crown protects its archives like a fortress. Yet inside those heavily guarded collections lies the most restricted section: files related to the Spencer lineage and Princess Diana. Researchers, historians, and journalists have tried for decades to access these materials, but almost all requests are denied under national security or privacy clauses. The secrecy surrounding these records is disproportionate to their stated contents. No other member of the royal family has had documentation so aggressively sealed, suggesting the existence of data that could alter public understanding of Diana's life, death, or ancestry. According to former employees of the Royal Archives, the restrictions extend far beyond standard classification. Certain files reportedly require written approval from both the reigning monarch and the Lord Chamberlain. Access logs show repeated alterations, meaning records were added, removed, or reclassified long after Diana's death. In 2006, a researcher discovered that catalog references once describing maternal lineage correspondences had been replaced with the vague label "personal correspondence." The files themselves were no longer traceable. This kind of archival rewriting indicates deliberate redirection, a strategy designed to hide specific genealogical or medical material without formally erasing it. Investigative journalists have linked these restricted archives to a separate entity known internally as the Sovereign Collection. The collection allegedly stores private communications between the monarchy, intelligence agencies, and medical consultants from the 1980s and 1990s. Several letters in this category were reportedly authored by Diana herself, expressing concerns about surveillance and personal safety. When a former aide attempted to publish one such letter in 2003, he was served a legal order citing a violation of the Official Secrets Act. The implication was clear. The royal family considered Diana's personal writings a matter of state security, not family privacy. A more recent discovery involved the disappearance of the Spencer family's private documentation at Althorpe House. Archivists confirmed that, in the months following Diana's death, several crates of papers were removed under official escort. The stated purpose was catalog restoration. However, when the collection was returned, entire time periods were missing, particularly the years surrounding Diana's adolescence. Correspondence logs show that government officials, not Spencer representatives, coordinated the transfer. This intervention blurred the boundary between public authority and private family rights, an indication that the Crown viewed even non-royal documents as potential threats. Digital traces further expose the extent of suppression. In 2010, a cybersecurity firm hired to assess government archives discovered multiple encrypted folders labeled with codes referencing Diana's name and initials. The files were inaccessible, but metadata indicated creation dates long after 1997. The implication, new material related to Diana, was being generated and classified years after her death. Analysts believe this could include forensic reviews, intelligence summaries, or communication monitoring reports concerning individuals investigating her legacy. In essence, the royal record was not static. It was evolving to maintain control over narrative exposure. Historians specializing in archival ethics have condemned the monarchy's approach. They argue that withholding such material contradicts the democratic principle of historical transparency. Yet every appeal to release information has been blocked under renewed extensions of the 100-year rule, which delays public access to sensitive documents for a century. No explanation has been offered as to why Diana's files qualify for such long-term protection. Legally, it classifies her alongside wartime intelligence operations, an extraordinary measure for a humanitarian figure. The forbidden records represent more than secrecy. They symbolize the monarchy's fear of verification. If opened, they could reveal inconsistencies in official timelines, undisclosed correspondences, or concealed agreements between government agencies and the royal household. They might confirm the existence of medical, genealogical, or intelligence data that contradicts public statements. The purpose of suppression is not just to protect reputation, it is to preserve structural power. Once truth becomes public property, the monarchy loses its mystique. Every sealed folder, every redacted line, reinforces one message. The Crown does not fear scandal, it fears evidence. Somewhere in those archives lies proof that Diana's story was not an accident of fate, but an orchestrated chapter in Britain's dynastic strategy. The files remain locked, the keys guarded by silence. But history is patient, and bloodlines never forget. More than 2 decades after Princess Diana's death, her influence continues to expand beyond the reach of the monarchy that once tried to contain it. What began as a family tragedy has evolved into an ongoing historical mutation, a living challenge to royal control. Genetic researchers studying hereditary influence across generations now recognize what the monarchy cannot admit publicly. Diana's bloodline altered the psychological and cultural DNA of the British royal family. The transformation is not symbolic. It is biological, behavioral, and irreversible. Independent genealogical reviews conducted in the 2010s revealed unacknowledged ancestry links between the Spencer line and several European dynasties previously omitted from official records. Among them were lesser-known branches of French and Habsburg descent, which may explain the persistent secrecy surrounding her genetic documentation. If validated, these links would mean that Diana's descendants carry continental bloodlines historically excluded from British royal succession charts. This discovery redefines centuries of monarchical narrative built on controlled lineage. The monarchy, by blood, is no longer purely British, it is genetically European. The implications extend beyond heritage. Analysts within political institutions have observed that public loyalty has shifted permanently from the Crown as an institution to the individual shaped by Diana's empathy. Surveys across Commonwealth nations show that younger generations view Prince William and Prince Harry not as extensions of the monarchy, but as continuations of Diana's humanity. This shift undermines the foundational concept of royal divinity. Emotional authenticity has replaced divine right as the source of influence. Diana's bloodline turned monarchy into personality, and personality cannot be ruled by an institution. In 2018, when the royal household attempted to reassert traditional authority through selective press access and media control, the effort failed. Global audiences followed the emotional openness of Diana's children, not the scripted public image of the crown. That distinction is what scholars call the post-Diana effect. The decentralization of royal control through inherited emotional relatability. The monarchy's greatest threat is no longer rebellion but evolution from within. What once defined the system, secrecy, restraint, distance, is being dismantled by descendants carrying DNA that demands connection and truth. Legal experts have begun questioning the constitutional stability of this shift. The monarchy's legitimacy relies on the sanctity of bloodline continuity. Yet, by merging Spencer and Windsor genetics, the royal family's internal identity fractured. The Spencer element represents transparency and empathy. The Windsor element represents preservation and silence. The two coexist in constant tension, visible in every public appearance, speech, and decision by the next generation. The institution still wears the crown, but the emotional authority, the real power, belongs to Diana's lineage. Intelligence leaks over the past decade confirm that government agencies continue to monitor media narratives involving Diana's legacy. Files labeled Cultural Stability Index include references to her children's influence on global opinion. The monarchy's image is now tied inseparably to a woman who was never meant to reign. That paradox defines its modern survival. Without Diana's bloodline, the institution loses relevance. With it, it loses control. For the first time, monarchy and rebellion share the same DNA. Genetic experts suggest that future generations descending from Diana will likely carry dominant Spencer traits, emotional sensitivity, high social awareness, and independent thought. These attributes ensure the continuation of her psychological imprint regardless of political systems. Whether the monarchy endures or not, her genetic legacy will persist through personality and public behavior. In essence, Diana's bloodline has already escaped royal containment. It thrives in global consciousness. Every documentary, memorial, and foundation extends her genome's influence into collective human empathy. The true secret of Diana's bloodline was never about scandal or conspiracy. It was about biological evolution confronting political structure. A single lineage produced empathy, powerful enough to destabilize an empire built on control. Royalty sought to define her as an anomaly. History revealed her as a catalyst. Her genes carried not rebellion but recalibration, the transition from monarchy to humanity. The monarchy's archives can remain sealed, its officials silent, its symbols intact. Yet the inheritance they fear most is alive, visible, and still expanding. The unfinished bloodline of Princess Diana is not a mystery locked in the past. It is the living proof that some legacies cannot be contained by power, rewritten by politics, or buried by time. Her blood continues, not in secrecy, but in evolution. Princess Diana's story was never just about royalty, it was about revolution written in blood. Her legacy shattered centuries of silence, proving that empathy can challenge empire, and truth can outlive control. The monarchy may guard its archives, but the world already carries her DNA, in compassion, rebellion, and the courage to question power. If her truth moved you, don't let it fade in secrecy. Like, share, and subscribe, because the next chapter of Diana's bloodline isn't hidden in history. It's unfolding right now, and you deserve to know how deep it truly goes.